Good morning, Robin. It's so good to see you on this, bright, hopefully not too chilly morning, but I don't know yet what that's exactly like. How was your weekend?
It was good. It was restful. It was very restful.
Restful is key. Is there anything that, makes a weekend particularly restful for you or, a habit that you like on a weekend that's cozy and indoors?
I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, so it's really a crapshoot. I feel like I often get pulled into projects on the weekend. So like there's always there tends to be something that kind of pulls me out of my house or like gets me to the computer over a weekend. This weekend I didn't have any of that, which is sort of rare. So whenever I get to just like fully zone in on home, it's always a little less chaotic than if I have to split the attention. So I appreciate that.
That's so special, and I'm sure that more and more people can resonate with that. Who now, are part of that remote workforce that always has their work right there, should they want to open it. But what a special time when you take a few days to step away. But I'm so excited to have you here today, and I'm so grateful to have this chance to learn more about the work that you do and the impact it has on our community in Northwest Arkansas, and I think ultimately the world. So without further ado, this is Robin Wallis Atkinson, CEO of INTERFORM. Robin, I'm so excited to know more about INTERFORM, more about your work there, but also like back to the beginning and how we ended up at this really exciting point. So what I'd like to do first, if you're open to it, is go
Yeah,
into your personal background, see
sure.
where art and creativity, kind of your interest for these things started to grow. Where did you grow up? What were you like as a child? Let's go there first.
So I grew up in Arkansas. I grew up nearby. I actually spent most of my childhood on I say it was on a dairy farm, but not technically. It was like on a farm behind a dairy farm. So my dad is not a dairy farmer. But I grew up on a dairy farm outside of Siloam Springs in this sort of like very idyllic Arkansas natural setting. We had a bunch of land on the Illinois River um, back when the Illinois River was like particularly dirty. Actually, I've gone back and looked at like what those levels look like when I was a kid, and it's not. I'm amazed I don't have fins or flippers, but it was beautiful. It was really, really beautiful, and like there's lots of ways to sort of look back on it and wonder if it would have been one way or another. But it, I think, really did inform the kind of very broad sense of creativity and ambition I was allowed to create because there were just no boundaries on anything. It was like, just go outside and run for as far as you can. And, like, and then when you're winded, you can just run back and you will never pass another person. It's just this kind of expansive, like, you know, very idyllic sort of scenario. And but it also, there was nobody around. So there was like a lot of having to use my imagination to sort of stay busy. I didn't, it was a long drive to school. Then when I got to school, it was like a really small school. And so as a kid, I definitely spent a lot of time sort of like dreaming up projects and I lived on an imaginary island for like a very long time. There was also, we had lots and lots of pets. So I built this like really strong relationship to nature and to animals and things like that. Just all those sort of like corny country things you think to be true or like pretty true. And then when I was in junior high school, we moved to Fayetteville. So here where I live now, it's very, very weird to me because after traveling the world and living all over, I live like 3 blocks away from one of the houses I lived in when I was a like 11-year-old or 12-year-old. So I drive past it once a day, and it's always very funny to feel like, God, I landed so close. So, but yeah, I went to junior high and high school in Fayetteville, and then I got my undergrad here in art history. Back when the art history department was like 2 people. It was wonderful. I had a professor named Donald Harrington, who is like an Arkansas treasure. He is a novelist who I think he passed away several years ago, but he wrote many, many, many books about the sort of like folklore of the Ozarks, and he built his kind of own mythical folklore thing. So, it was really nice to be studying under somebody who had that same kind of like appreciation of nature's ability to connect to art, or art, the sort of relationship between art and nature. And I remember very specifically, I think I was in my it was like 20, oh, who knows? It was like 2006. I want to say something like that. It was right before I left. He put up a slide of Asher B. Duran's Kindred Spirits painting on the screen, and he said, Alice Walton just bought this. And no, none of us knew who Alice Walton was. This was like a million years ago, before the Waltons had really like started I mean, I knew the Walton Art Center was called the Walton Art Center, so certainly there was like an inkling of what that meant, but you know, and he explained what a big deal it was that Kindred Spirits had been purchased and that it was coming here. And we talked a lot about like the Hudson River School and sort of, you know, American art and this like manifest destiny version of American art. And who knew, like who knew in that class that one purchase sort of like sparked such a gigantic overhaul of what art could mean in America. So yeah, so that was, I remember that like you know, when I decided to move back, after, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but I have thought back to that day a lot and thought like that's one of those days that, you know, it sort of like plants a seed that you don't pull back up until like, you know, 10 chapters later in the book.
Yes, and that was you said like early 2000s, right? Like pre-Crystal Bridges.
Yeah, she had just
what foresight.
Yeah.
That's so cool that you were studying art history, and that, I mean, art and collection of art would come to mean so much in this nearby area, right? How did you make that first decision? I know you talked a little bit about being creative as a child, and I love this perspective that being in a maybe less developed landscape actually gives you more room for your mind to wander and create on its own, because it has nothing like to bounce it off of in the same way. How did that translate to an interest in art history though?
Well, so I mean, I really probably should have done studio art, but I started my undergrad as an architecture student, and then I'm going to tell you a secret: architecture is very hard, and I wasn't quite ready to commit to basically anything at that point. So I was a painter. Actually, I was spending most of my free time painting at that time. I was, you know, I was having art shows. I was super young. I was like 17 years old. So it's not, you know, who can know anything about what they want to be at 17. But so I went through a few different funny channels, and then I landed on art history because I felt like, you know, if I was going to be an artist, I figured I probably have to figure, you know, you'll figure out how to do it along the way. Art's art. Like, it can't be, you know, that difficult. I was wrong. But the art history part, like, when else will you get that? You know, when else will you be forced to like sit down and read those books and learn about the trajectory? And I've always been really, really interested in like long threads of knowledge. So like thinking about the influence of one painter on a certain school and like a certain particular place of Europe, and how that ends up with like this, you know, masterpiece American, you know, school of thinking or whatever, like these kinds of like very long stories. So but then also simultaneously, while I was getting my degree, I also helped found a nonprofit called Artemis. It wasn't a nonprofit when we started it, it was a party, but it was a party come nonprofit. And that led me to sort of think about curating as a potential future track of like, what would it be like to be a curator in the future? And this was in 2000, like I said, 2004, 2006, 2007. Curating wasn't a conversation in Arkansas. It wasn't a conversation anywhere. Like, it was, you know, the idea of the curatorial hadn't landed in the Midwest yet. I mean, maybe it had, but it hadn't gotten to me. Yeah. And so I was sort of thinking that if I wanted to become a curator, if I wanted to go that track, that art history was going to be the better background to have. And I was right. I mean, that turned out to be true. So
yes.
Yeah.
But so Artivest was a party.
Artemis. Yeah.
Artemis. What, can you walk me through that? That sounds so cool.
So a friend of mine was the actual founding curator of that organization. She, her name's Summer. She's in LA now, I think. But she was home from New York for like a winter or something. She was here she had already moved away and had come back and wanted to do an exhibition, just like a fun show. And one of the things I learned from Summer was that like you can kind of do anything you want if you don't take yourself too seriously in the process. So she just sort of like put out a lot of phone calls to a lot of different people, and she asked me. I was a very big socialite at the time. I have to say, I was very like, I threw a lot of parties at my house. I lived a block off Dixon Street, and I was in my early 20s. No, I was 17. Ooh, whoops. But it was a kind of, I was very involved in a certain sort of community of creative people. It's a generous way of saying that. And so she invited me to be an artist in the show. And then because I don't know how to do anything like halfway, I dove in with both feet, and I helped her select the artists and, do the like what loose admin was on the back end, and like think about what, how to hang this show and things like that. And so it was a show that was at the Dixon Street Theater, which is now a basketball court. It doesn't exist. It's like, it's been, it was bought by the Tyson Family Foundation a year or so ago, and they're turning it into an art basketball court. But like it's funny, like an entire community of artists was like born from this funny party that happened there in 2003. And so it was a lot of fun. We had fun. I had friends that were in bands that played, and, I had paintings there. I don't know if it was, no, I just had some paintings. Like 2 shows later, I did this giant sculptural installation that was a lot. So I helped on the first one, and then we sort of looked at each other and we were like, should we do this again in 6 months? That was really fun. And so we just said yes. And then we just kept doing it again in 6 months. Like it just kept being something that happened again in 6 months. And so at a certain point, I was actually working as a receptionist at a law office. And I just sort of asked the guy that I worked for whether or not we should think about becoming a nonprofit. And I'm pretty sure that's how we got the 501c3. I couldn't, like, it's a blur. Maybe that's not how it happened. I feel like that's how it happened. But I was very young, and it was a very funny thing to have like gotten myself into. But it definitely, I'm always very, very quick to say like I helped found it. I was not the founder because there were so many of us that were involved. And it was a very like fluctuating amorphous blob of like people who would get involved and feel very, very connected to it. And then they'd sort of like, we were all very young, so they kind of just disappear. And then like, it was always a shifting group of people, but we built some structure to it. And it was just essentially like an open call exhibition that happened every 6 months. And then we would curate the things, and then it would be a party. And then it was fun. It was really, really fun.
It's so cool and so impressive. I think it reminds me of like cafe society. Like I feel like you were part of this group of artists and creatives and thinkers in Northwest Arkansas who were making their mark or coming into their own. And I just can't imagine, how fun it was to be here at that point, pre-Crystal Bridges really coming into its own, like really setting the stage of what the rhythm of creative life here was going to be like. Like that's huge that you were there at that moment. And I think that the other takeaway I think that's so encouraging and should be a really inspiration for other people is that only so much of your education can come from the classroom, right? Like it sounds like this was a huge part of your network building, of you establishing this identity as curator, as community builder. And, you could go to school and go home and do nothing else, and you'll have learned something from a book. But what you do with that comes from, I guess, like, the extracurricular side of what you're pursuing during those academic years.
Well, so I definitely always tell everybody, like, go to college. You need to probably go to college. However, I am also I'm a very firm believer that the best way to learn is by doing, and the really best way to learn is by failing. And so the thing that I do wish that was built into curriculum at the art school sort of level, or any kind of higher educational level, is that just because you aren't in New York in the 80s or in the 60s, and you aren't part of this, like, just because you're not part of the moment that's been written down doesn't mean that your moment isn't worthy of being written down. It's just somebody has to write it down. And just because you aren't centrally located in a hub of, like, nothing feels historical in the moment you're doing it, right? Like nothing when the expressionists were, sort of doing their thing, no, they didn't, I mean, they might have had some inkling because they were, egos were giant, but like, I don't think that there was like a true understanding of how much emphasis was going to be placed in that moment in time for the future of art. And then you've got people like Clement Greenberg writing the history of it as it's going, as it's happening. And that's why we all know about it, because somebody sat around and wrote about it. And so it's, I always try to say, like, you need to find your bard. It's funny that I ended up going to school at a place called Bard, but you need to find the person who can contextualize for you what it is you're doing in the moment, because what you're doing is probably significant in some way. It may not be significant on a global level, but certainly it's significant to you and like 10 people around you. And that's, that's enough. And so, I think that we don't give ourselves enough credit in the moment for being able to start our own movements and like, to sort of, and so I think that's why it's beautiful that what you're doing is like, you're sort of like doing a little bit of a narrative of like, what is a snapshot of what art looks like in this place today? Because 20 years from now, it'll be a totally different picture. And having that kind of origin story makes things valuable. I mean, just having a history written down makes something inherently more accessible,
Yes, so true. And thank you for what you said, but I so appreciate your perspective and that phrasing of like, it's going to be historical if we decide matters. Like, just decide that what you're doing matters. Because it does, because it matters. It absolutely does. So we went down a bit of a rabbit hole, but I'm so glad we did, because it was so much fun for me and I understand so much better. So you're at this point of like dipping your toes into curating in Arkansas. You end up deciding to get a master's, right? Is that the next step in the journey?
Oh, not meaningful. No. So I did a weird thing. I did a lot of weird things in my life, but I made one very specific decision. I heard about an exhibition that was happening in New Orleans. It was called Prospect New Orleans. It was supposed to be an international art biennial. I didn't really understand what that meant, but I was down for it. I had several years of running Artemis on my resume, even though I was 24. 24? I wasn't even 24 yet. I was 23. I was about to turn 24. And I just called them and I emailed somebody and I said, like, hi, do you need help? And it turns out they did desperately need help. And so it wasn't that easy. Like, I did have to sort of bug them a lot. And then I contacted a volunteer coordinator, and then I was like, well, secret is I don't really want to volunteer, but like I will if I have to, but I don't know. Can I have a job? Are there jobs? What is the story? And so they brought me down for an interview, which was kind of, it was a very short notice thing. They called me and they asked if I could interview it was like a Monday. They asked if I could interview on a Friday. I'd never been to New Orleans in my life. I didn't realize it was an 11-hour car drive. That's a little far. But I ended up just saying, like, yes, I'll come down and I'll do it. So I drove down with some friends for the weekend. I interviewed. I met with the executive director, who was the founding curator of Prospect, whose name was Dan Cameron. He used to be the executive director of the New Museum in New York, and then he left and he went to Prospect, and then he left Prospect. He's been lots of places since then. But he was like a relatively significant curatorial figure at the time. I mean, he's the founding curator of a biennial. And I remember going into the interview, so silly. I went into the interview very nervous, had no idea who I was talking to. So like that helps. If you don't know who you're talking to, you can be a little less, I didn't realize he was like a famous person when I walked into the room. And I chatted him up and he asked me what I knew about public transit. And I was like, I'm familiar with the concept of public transit. Like, I don't know what to tell you about New Orleans public transit. I've never used it, but I bet I could, Wikipedia my way around it. And then I got up and I left. And as I was leaving the building, I realized that my belt had been undone the entire time. And it was just like sitting, like hanging from my pants. I was like, what was that? What a weird decision to like be that person in your life. But anyway, so I figured I blew it. I figured I would never hear from them again. I went and had a fun weekend in New Orleans. Actually, that's not true. I went to the pool and I laid on a pool float for the weekend and then like ignored everything else and was kind of like had a malaise because I really wanted the job and I didn't think I was going to get it. And then I got a phone call from I guess she was like the director of curatorial affairs, I think at the time. and she asked if she could meet me at a coffee shop. If could I meet her at Tulane? I think she was at Tulane, and come meet her for a quick chat. So I had my friend drop me off there, and I met with a woman named Ilva Rouse, who ended up being my boss for the next like 5 years, something like that, a long time. And she asked when I could come to work, and I said, well, I'll be here next Friday. So I found an apartment later that afternoon, and I told him I'll be back next week. Please don't give it away. And I packed my car up and I left. And that was a lot. And it was I had a life here, you know, I had a whole situation going on here. But I knew that if I wanted to be who I wanted to be, I was going to have to go. And I had to like go. I don't know if you could hear all the chaos happening back there, but it is what it is. Yeah. So I went, and I was the curatorial coordinator for the first Prospect New Orleans, which was now the largest international biennial in the States. It was at the time the largest international biennial in the States, but it was the first one. And so there was a lot of like ground to cover and a lot to prove. It was 3 years post Katrina. So it was 2008. It was very, very fresh. And a lot of the show was about Katrina, and a lot of the work that I helped install was very specifically works about Katrina in the lower Ninth Ward, which is the area that was most devastated by the hurricane. So I'm a person who grew up on a farm. I've had very little interaction with like diverse communities in my life. I have a lot of optimism, and I have a car. These are like the things I had, and I took to my job, and they plopped me in the Ninth Ward, and they said, make this work. And I was like, well, I didn't know what I didn't know, you know? And I think that like the older I get in my life, the more I feel like it's so much better to not know what rules you're breaking. So you can just go in and do what you think needs to be done. And then later you'll learn all the things that you did that were hugely taboo, but it didn't matter because it worked. That's kind of the way it worked. It's like, I think I succeeded because I didn't know how radically inclusive I was being, because I didn't know art was exclusive yet. Like I just didn't know. And so it was kind of it was like, I really was magical. Like I think a lot of people really wondered how I could have possibly pulled off what I pulled off in like 12 weeks or something. But the answer was because I didn't know it was supposed to be hard. Nobody told me, but apparently it was supposed to be hard, but I thought it was really fun. So.
Oh my God, it's so amazing, right? The way, you know, how our brain frames something shapes how we show up for it and what we do for it. And if your brain had framed it as, oh, this is impossible, I'm never gonna be able to do it, I have to learn all the rules first. Like, what a narrow experience that would have been versus the expansiveness that came out of this amazing time you had in New Orleans.
Yeah, I think it's super, super helpful to not know what you don't know, you know?
Yes.
I think if you know what you don't know, there's some pressure to learn it. But if you don't even know what you don't know, then like, what a lovely place to be. And I always try to encourage, so I truly, truly believe, because my life, like the trajectory of my life from 23 to 24 was just a huge turn, because I got involved in international contemporary art. I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, from a girl from a farm in Arkansas, like, what does that even mean? That doesn't mean anything. And so but it was just this giant, and it was only because like of a few encounters, like at the right place at the right time, I made a couple of the right decisions, and then like boom, I had a curatorial career, because right after Prospect I got hired to work. So Dan, you know, Prospect kind of, I mean, frankly, the economy collapsed like the day the show opened. The crash of the financial crash of 2008 happened like the opening weekend of Prospect. So the organization like went bankrupt like immediately, because, and I understand why. I mean, like a lot of people had said they were going to put money into it, and then a lot of people lost a lot of money. And so it just sort of fell apart financially. And so, but they kept me on. Dan hired me for like a different job. And then he kind of like hired me for like 3 other jobs simultaneously that I was doing, just to sort of get the bills paid and make sure that I could stick around. And then I got hired on a show that he was doing in South Korea, and I got to go to South Korea with him, which was wild. And then, you know, I was getting pulled to New York to do different projects up there, and also like helping. I got involved in gallery work in New Orleans, and I started painting again, and I started, I worked with a collective gallery, and I helped them get a lot of grant money. Just generally was like stayed very, very busy, and like was, because of my proximity to other successful people, was like assumed to be very successful, which is really handy for you if you're very young to sort of just say, yes, of course I am also very successful. And then after a minute, it becomes true, right? Like after, then you just do a couple things correctly, and then it's a true thing. So, so I, you know, I went from being here and like, working as a receptionist at a law office to being like in the center of the art world and getting flown around to do fun things and meet with fun people, and really try to sort of self-determine what I was going to do. And then, the recession was really super hard on the art world. It was hard on all the worlds. And Prospect got delayed. They were supposed to do another one, and it got pushed back. And so I went to grad school. I decided to go get my master's in curatorial studies, and that was a okay decision. I was fine. I wouldn't do it again, but
it must have been, I worked for several years before I went back to school, and that's a hard transition. Like I don't know. I found that, there's a certain type of productivity and energy and pace and making that are in the real world, regardless of what you're doing. And then you come back to school and you're like, I feel restrained in some ways, and I'm learning some things, but what was that transition like for you?
Bard was fine. It was, the thing about Bard is that it's really well connected. That program is very, very well connected to like all the people you need to know. I am not a human who thrives on that kind of connectivity. Like I just am not. Like I said, I feel like I flourished in New Orleans because I didn't know what I wasn't supposed to be doing. And Bard really told you what you weren't supposed to be doing. I felt like I was like, every day I went there and they were like, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, you should do it this way, you should do it this way. And I was just like, this is crushing my soul. And so I pushed back on it a lot. I pushed back on it. And in some ways, it's, my time at Bard was really interesting because I walked in the door the first day and I saw the way they were doing their master's thesis shows. And I was like, this is really dumb. You should do it a different way. You should, because the way the building was built is like this giant building in the middle of nowhere because it's in upstate New York. And on the one side, there was a museum that had like 15 galleries that was beautiful. And on the other side, there was like a barn, basically like a giant airplane hangar. And they let the museum was the museum. It was where the art lived. And it was, you weren't supposed to, students couldn't work there. It was just for exhibitions for like the visiting curators. We never got involved over there. And then all of our shows were supposed to happen simultaneously in the same room. So you're supposed to have 12 different exhibitions in the same room at the same time, basically. I mean, they did it like two sections, so like 6 people, and then there's no walls. So like, how am I supposed to do an art exhibition in the same room with everybody else? That's very weird. So I just said, you should do the art exhibition. The master show's over here. It's better. Look, there's rooms. And it pissed them off and like blew their minds. They were like, wait, what? No, that's a museum. And I was like, dude, it's all the same building. Like it's the same foundation. What do you mean that's the museum and this is not a museum? And like, what's the difference between what's happens that's so special between these doors that changes so fundamentally what can happen over here than over here? Why is this 60-foot difference such a magical liminal space where you can't change anything? So I wrote a proposal and I submitted it to the leadership and to my class. And we did it. I changed the way the art exhibition structure happens at Bard. I know at least it stayed that way for the next few years. I don't know if it's still that way because honestly, I don't check out what's going on up there. But it was that kind of like, and everyone I just feel was constant. I just felt this constant friction of like, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to be brave. You're not supposed to think you can succeed just because you want to. You're supposed to be nervous about what other people are going to think of you. And that's really what I feel like the main story there was about. And I was like, I'm not. I'm not, because if I let that be who I am, how am I going to do anything? Like, how am I going to be successful? Or like, I always wanted to be the boss. I've always wanted to be the boss because I'm not great at having a boss. But also, like, my dad was his own boss. And I just, I've always, I just feel like, why not? Why not? I mean, I'll work for somebody again someday, I'm sure, and I'll love it. But, it very much felt like the structure they wanted us. It was all women. We were all young women. That was the other thing that pissed me off, was it was like a bunch of beautiful young women. And they're saying, like, you'll do really good if you impress XYZ people and make the shows they want you to make, so that they'll hire you into their structures if you behave, basically, is what I felt like they were telling me the whole time. And I was like, so this is finishing school.
So
basically.
definitive glass ceiling right there.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I did go I was very displeased with the process, if I'm honest. So I left grad school in a very sort of like a very, very disillusioned place. And then I went back to New Orleans, and then I came back here because I needed to sort of reset. I needed to shake the thing and reset. And I think that what I'm very glad I decided was that at no point was I going to fit into the box that anybody wanted me to fit into, right? Like, that was just and not because I'm smarter or better or like any stronger. It's because I fundamentally just throw elbows. The second you put a structure on me, I'm like, oh no, ugh, get it off. Just naturally. And then maybe it's because I grew up in a field, and I just, like, there was a zero structure. So, like, my parents weren't there. I just hung around. So, like, I still have that kind of very allergic reaction to that kind of, like, the structure of telling you what you can and can't do.
Yes, especially I think when you've had this really special track record of leaning into what your gut said was right and it working. So, like, why would we change those?
Yeah, that's right.
Really frustrating.
And so now I'm a human being who, like, runs a company and who has my own, I understand the need for structure. Like, I actually spent graduate school reading about structure, like reading about institution building and, like, what is an institution? Semantically, what is an institution? Like, how does an institution get born? How do you trick people into believing that something is an institution? Because an institution is essentially a series of concretized speech acts. That's kind of the way that I've decided you think about what an institution is. And so I have spent the latter part of my life trying to figure out how you build an institution around that magical space where things can be created. And the answer is, it's just more work for the grownups. and by grownups, I mean the people who've been there. Because, like, anybody who enters an institution is a baby. Even if they're a full-grown person, they're still new to this structure. And so it's just very inconvenient, because the answer is, you can create very creative spaces. You can build spaces that allow for that magic of kind of like elbowing your way out of a structure. It's just more work. It's just hard, and it doesn't stop being hard. So you can't get comfortable with the assumption that things are going to stay one way. You have to build it so that it's always open to be changed. Like a Rubik's Cube, you're going to always turn it and look at it from another angle. And that's frankly exhausting. I hope as I age, I will learn more tricks that make it less hard. But that's what I've, and so I think that that's a really magical thing to have been able to come to in my life, basically, is to say, like, I started this thing with no rules. I didn't realize all the rules I was breaking. It got me super successful for some reason. And then I entered into a structure that told me all the ways I was doing the wrong thing. And that really hurt my brain. It, like, really affected the way I was able to conceptualize what could be done. And then I came home and I built a new one, right? INTERFORM is this, like, it's built with all of the knowledge I have of what I've seen work, and all of the knowledge of what I've seen crush creativity, and just trying to make sure that I can create a space where I'm not the creative one. I get to be creative because it's my job, but like, it's creating space for other people to come in and say, what if?
Yes, I love
Right?
the duality that you get to figure out there of like having structure, but letting it be elbowable.
Yeah, you
Whatever it
gotta
needs
throw
to be, like
bows.
there has to be. We got some cushions, we got some movable walls, like we've got whatever.
Literally though.
I love that. So I'd love to hear more too about, maybe this is a good time to explain, what Interform is and kind of what it was. I think it's been known as NWA Fashion Week and the Arkansas Arts and Fashion Forums. It's gone through iteration.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you know more than me.
I do. So Fashion Week's funny. I took over Fashion Week when I got back here. Maybe because I knew nothing about what Fashion Week was supposed to be like. Like I had seen Fashion Week happen on social media when I was gone. Like when I was living in New Orleans, I saw that Northwest Arkansas Fashion Week was a thing. And I thought that was very curious. But the reason I knew about them is because they worked with Artemis. So I would see, because I used to run Artemis, and so it would pop up on my news feeds. And so the intersection between Northwest Arkansas Fashion Week and Artemis got my attention. So when I came back, I like asked around about it. And basically it was an organization that had gone defunct, like it was done. It had shut itself down essentially, and it was looking for somebody to take it over. And I sort of did. It was kind of offered to me in a way that I couldn't say no to. It sounded fun. It sounded hard, and like I like hard and fun. And I also didn't know that much about art, that much about fashion. So I thought it would really be something like to learn with, and it would be fun. I also thought it would be a really fun way to rebuild some collective stuff, because I love a collective. I love a community of people.
Yes.
The other thing that would really struck out to me when I came back was, after having been in New Orleans and working so specifically in the Ninth Ward and in the and like East New Orleans and in the old, in the Treme and things like that, and then moving to New York, was just how important diversity is to cultural expression in those places. And I came back here and realized like how whitewashed the area seemed was my, like, I knew it wasn't. I knew that there were people of color here, because that you don't get places where that's not true. And that it was very clear that that was not something that the region was like stoked about. It wasn't something that they were leaning into. And so I thought, like, cool. Here's what we'll do. We're going to take over a fashion organization. We're going to make a lot of really pretty pictures. We're going to put a lot of people of color in these pretty pictures, and we're going to just see where that goes. Like, we'll just sort of let that steer itself. And like, lo and behold, it turns out it was just the right moment. People were desperate to be seen in this region, like people of color specifically, but also just people of all kinds of difference were really wanted to be represented. They had not been being represented. And so to represent them back to themselves was this very energetic sort of thing. It was sort of boundary breaking thing. And so, we did some fashion shows, and it was a lot of fun. And then in order to expand the way we needed to expand, I needed a nonprofit, because I needed to be able to take a different kind of money than a for-profit takes. And so that's when we founded Arkansas Arts and Fashion Forum. And like, I built Arkansas Arts and Fashion Forum the same way that I built Artemis. I built it the same way that I built the structure up at Bard. I did it the same way that I did all the stuff in New Orleans. I basically said, look, here are the rules. And the rules are, we're here to do whatever the next thing is that needs to get done. And we're going to bend this structure to whatever it needs to be to get that done. Okay, what does that mean when there's two staff members? I mean, it was me and my friend Rachel. So it was easy. And there's two of you, having a structureless structure is pretty easy. And then the pandemic hit, really, is basically, I'm sort of glossing over the fact where we did all the fashion weeks, and those were amazing, and like people loved them. Because I kind of feel like that's not, to me, that's not the magic of what it is. It is great. It's an output for sure. It's like a thing that occurs, but it is not the thing itself. The thing itself is this operation, this structure that gets to create all these other things. So during the pandemic, obviously, ruined all the things. No more events, no more fun. So we switched over and we started making face masks. We've made something like 25,000 face masks. And that was a really pivotal moment in my career, because I remember so specifically COVID starting and feeling so kind of like unmoored, like I'm sure so many of us felt. But really, I'm really somebody who just like, what do we need to do? Like, what's the action item? You know, I don't want to theorize about it. I'm like, what's the action item? And so for us, it was just like the only action item is people need face masks, and face masks don't exist. And supply chains are broken, so you can't have face masks. And I was like, well, that's not that tricky. Like, just make some face masks. So we did. And it was a good decision. And I'm really proud of us for making that decision. And then we decided to rebrand and sort of relaunch as INTERFORM for 2021, because we had learned so much through 2020. And also because the goal was always going to be to use Fashion Week as a brand to leverage the growth of another brand that would become the parent of Fashion Week. Because I never wanted to be the person who runs Fashion Week. That was never like, that feels weird. That feels like, if that's all I do, that doesn't feel true to who I am. But I did realize that it was successful and people liked it, people knew what it was. So if I could use it to build something on the other side of it and then pop that back out and have it be the boss, then I could be the boss of that and somebody else could run Fashion Week. So really that is what's happening. And it's been so hard. I'm not going to gloss over the fact that it's been so hard, but it has been so fun. It's been so fun.
It's I love that idea. I think that's so clever to have the smaller thing birth the bigger thing, and very cool. And I hadn't realized how recent it was that INTERFORM became INTERFORM. So that's awesome insight. I wonder too, as I'm thinking about and hearing you discuss structure and the people inside the structure and getting them bought into it. It sounds like, especially in the case of INTERFORM and the fashion shows, there was an arm of, or an element of getting the community bought into what the structure was and what its purpose was. And you talked a little bit about the photos and making sure that the faces that showed up looked different than the ones that were there before. But can you talk more to, the struggle or the ease of getting the community to understand that this was more than a fashion show?
So it's been so much fun. So the thing is, if you look at it from one angle, I bet it looks hard. Like, I bet it looks hard if you're looking at it from one perspective. From the inside of it, it's been really easy insofar as we just made a decision that, like, people of color, specifically Black people, were really, really not being represented in Northwest Arkansas, and they really needed to be. So, like, what are we going to do about it? And the answer was really easy, which was like, invite some people of color and some Black people to like star in a few things, and then ask like, what's the next thing? So not many people know this, but the very first event I ever did as the leader of Fashion Week was an event called the Textured Hair Affair. And it was a hair showcase for textured hair, which is largely women of color. And I did a runway show for that event, which was, I was one of 3 white people in the room for that. And it was just like a really, really beautiful, fun, I had no idea what I was doing, kind of like launch into it. But it was like it did the exact right thing, which it got a lot of like really wonderful Black women involved in the idea that this thing could exist. And then like at the table with me talking about what the next sort of thing could be. And like, I think it's very telling to, that our communications manager, Rochelle Bailey, was a model in that show. Like, we met on that show and we started working together then. And, I've been having her tell me what the next right thing is for like a long time. And so the thing is that I think a lot of other people assumed that it wasn't their job to be representing people of color, because I think a lot of people who were making those decisions were white people. And so I think that white people often tell themselves that it's not their job to do that work. It's not their place. And so, when we just very clearly said, well, you're wrong, you can do it, and this is probably how you should be doing it. The enthusiasm with which it was met was just like kind of unparalleled, because it was so needed. It was so desperately needed. And so, we we never said that's what we were doing for the first couple years, because I knew that if we said it was what we were doing, we were going to do it wrong, because we were going to set the idea that this is what the thing was, and then they were going to tell us all the rules about how we were supposed to do it, right? Again, all these rules about how you're supposed to do this thing. And so it wasn't until 3 years in that I finally like said, okay, well, we can now call this inclusivity, or we can call this diversity, but like, we're not going to call it that until we have a track record of it. And so I think that INTERFORM specifically is a place, I hope that we're building a place where people know they can bring us an idea and we will, to the best of our ability, put it true to form, right? And so like, if it's a, you know, I hope we're becoming a place that feels safe for individuals who have been sort of erased or not represented or underrepresented, who are rightfully nervous about bringing their ideas to the bigger world for fear of co-optation or rejection or whatever. And we can sort of be like that soft, safe place for you to launch an idea. I don't think we're the right place for all ideas. I think that we're small. So if you want to do a huge thing, we might not be the partner for you, but we're not that small. So, you know, we are getting bigger. So I don't know if I answered the question. That felt like a very wishy-washy answer.
I think you covered so many like beautiful aspects of what make INTERFORM. And I think too, what a like powerful model to have the event be the thing that brings the people who then share their ideas, who then create the next thing. Like that's very responsive to the community and react, and like positive version of reactive. Like I think that that's like the purest sense of community driven, right? Like to be like, I'm not even going to plan I'm going to wait to hear what's needed. And that could probably be uncomfortable for a lot of people who want to know, like, the next 3 years, you're going to have this, this, and this on this timeline. And you're kind of just like, I understand that we need to be there for what the community needs. And we can't necessarily know that until they tell us. Like, that's a beautiful relationship.
Man, I have to tell you, I have the most patient program officer in the world. Like so we're, you know, I won't say we're very well, but we're well funded by the Walton Family Foundation. Like they have been incredibly supportive of our work for a while. And my program officer is like the most patient human, because he's learned, and now he has an assistant who I think is also learning, that like, I will give you the vague outline of like a probability of a set of things. And then I will promise that I will do it the way that I do it, right? And so like part of what we've been able to be built is built on this like reputational factor of the fact that we've done it right, right? So like I can sort of say, because like right now, for instance, I'm submitting a 3-year grant on Friday. And it's so funny because it is sort of this like, so mostly these things will more than likely occur. What are they about and who's in them? And like, I don't know that. I can't tell you that answer yet, but I can tell you that the general structure of this concept will occur on this timeline. And then all of that internal, like the who and the what and the how, like we know we'll do that because we've done it. And so, but you're right. It's like, I think that we have had a lot of people come in and leave the organization. If firm answers and firm structures are your jam, we may not be the place, just because it is a different day every day. And like right now, my sweet, wonderful, amazing, brilliant team is trying to sort of build structures around me, which is good and so necessary. And so my job is to sort of sit and figure out how to make sure that their structures can still take all of that pushback. Right. And then it's also my job is to invite people in who like have different understandings of what the pushback needs to be. And then they create that themselves. And that we like, I think of it as like it's almost like you know, if you're building, like if you're clay building or something and you build the sides, you have to build like these 4 square sides, and then you have to put an external resistance around it to like support the internal resistance.
Yeah.
And the whole thing has to be super rubbery, because like it has to not fall down, but it also can't be so rigid it can't be pushed. And so like that is a very abstract thing to say. How do you write that into an Excel spreadsheet? How do you put a number on that? I don't know. We're learning.
But that little stint in architecture seems kind of helpful with this structure that's supported by the inside and the outside, and it wiggles and it jiggles,
Yeah.
does all the things. And I'm gonna rotate my chair a little. The sun is coming in. We're just flexible with the natural lighting. But no, I really appreciate how you describe that. And I think it's a cool transition to understand even some more explicitly, like, what is at this point, the mission of INTERFORM and those three lenses of learning, making, and showing. I wonder if you could speak to those.
Yeah, so we've tried to, through a lot of like internal reflection and a lot of kind of like really trying to figure out what it is we do, we've realized it's pretty easy actually. You can kind of boil it down to concepts rather than actions, which is like, we're very engaged in the idea of teaching people to do something or giving them some structures in which to learn to do something. So a great example is like, we have a lot of sewing classes. You come in and you do learn to sew. That is a thing we will teach you. Or in the case of assembly, we will give you curatorial courses. Like you can learn some curatorial strategies with us. With Emerge, the designer residency program, like you come and you learn about branding. You learn about like representing yourself as a designer. So those like that intellectualized sort of part, the educational part, and then we make you do it. We ask you to do it. We don't make you do it. We ask you to do it. So, and that's what the make is. So it's like learn to do something, but then actually do it. You have to prove it. You've got to make the garment, or you have to execute the show, or you have to, make the collection, but like you've got to execute on that idea that you learned. And then show is, we'll use the money that we have to show it to people, basically. So it's like you get the entire cycle. And I just feel like so many educational structures land with one, like you can learn it, but you got to make it somewhere else. Or you can make it, but you can't show it off here. And so we just want to go through that whole cycle of like, learn it, make it, show it. That's one life cycle. If you think about like almost like the life cycle of a caterpillar or something, or a butterfly, it's like, you start as a caterpillar, you go in a cocoon, and then you're a butterfly. Like you got to do all three things.
Yes.
And so that's really, and what's really fun about that is that it's not like we lean into fashion for a few reasons. And like, I feel like I've talked so much, I didn't even talk about the part that where I think fashion is like a more interesting version of art because people understand it better. People don't understand art. Most human beings, I mean, art has built structures around itself that make it sound more complicated than it is so that they can have value, right? Art needs to have value because it is essentially an investment structure at this point, right? Contemporary art is a financial system. And so it has to be convoluted because it can't be easily explained, because if it's easily explained, it can't be expensive. Okay, fine. Fashion is like, yeah, fashion's expensive. The fashion industry is an expensive place, but fashion itself, the shirt you're wearing, the pants you have on, I'm assuming you have on, in the world of Zoom, who knows?
Who knows?
You understand that. You understand that like somebody made this, you don't know who made it, but you understand that like your body fits into the physicality of an object and you can call that fashion. And so I think that people are more easily identify themselves in fashion than they do in art. And so we lean into fashion just because I think it's easier for people to self-identify into the structure with fashion. We then once they're there, we're like, secrets, it's art.
What I think is beautiful in that too is that it feels to me like INTERFORM is really making an investment in the future of a person, not even their present. Like even if you can't see for yourself when you're at the learning part, that there is going to be a time when you're at the showing part, the idea that someone has this promise from INTERFORM that they're going to be taken step by step along the way, I think is such an encouragement that you guys are seeing that future value of what that person's capacity is to do and make and be part of art. So I think people should be encouraged and excited about that.
I also think a really important part of that show is it's about capital. It's about capital, like not just financial capital, but it's about social capital and cultural capital. Like INTERFORM is a machine that is hopefully just sitting around creating its own cultural capital all day. And like we have a lot of output. We do a lot of really good work. I've got really, really brilliant people that work for me. So the brand INTERFORM like you said, it's only been around for a year. It already feels like something, right? Like it already has this kind of heft. And
Yeah.
that's after 1 year. So like imagine what it's doing 10 years from now, right? Like hopefully we've got a lot of heft on that. So if you come in, you've never done anything, this is your first time to curate something, or it's your first time to sew something, or it's your first time to do whatever, we're going to use our whole apparatus. And then at the end of it, we're going to put our brand on that thing you show the world, so that after that experience, like you get to then say in your life, like, oh, I was in an INTERFORM thing. And then that is like a seal. It's like a cherry on top, or like a seal of approval of like, oh, that means XYZ quality wise, or XYZ, and so our goal is to be a good steward of that capital, of that social and cultural capital, so that we can continue deploying it for other people, right? And so that we can continue, and like obviously we also grow it because of those people, like it's a give and take for sure there, but like that for me is where I think the real magic of what art can do is that it is an exchange. There is like I get something, you get something, and now you get to go like walk up another rung on the ladder, or stair step one way up, because like you came through this process and have some kind of like check mark.
Yeah.
And theoretically that's how all schools are supposed to work. It's just that lots of schools don't do that kind of investment,
Right. And I think that's where the good side of the structure that you're building comes in. And I can see that in how you describe it. And I'm so excited to see what it means for all the people who do come through the system of creativity that is INTERFORM in its
Let's
world.
just hope we can keep throwing elbows though. That's the hard part. Just make sure it's gotta be nimble, but it's gotta be strong.
Right. But I'm sure if someone's going to figure that out, it will be Robin. No doubt. So what is the current, project that is top of mind for you, or the many, I don't know.
Well, Fashion Week is coming up in March. So March 10th through 12th is Fashion Week. It's our first one since the pandemic. It's at the Momentary, which is not nothing. The executive director of the CFDA, the Council of Fashion Designers of America, is coming to town, which is very exciting. Like that's such a huge deal. If, knowing where we came from and knowing where we're going, like that's just such a big moment. So there's that. And then we're ramping up our manufacturing, because of course all good arts organizations have a manufacturing arm, right?
Gosh.
So we are getting really, really invested in the idea of making things. Part of the reason why we're doing that is a financial model for me. So like I've watched the art world for a long time, and I've been involved in different organizations for a very long time. And like almost anybody who's been around art long enough can tell you like it's not super sustainable on a financial level if you don't have like an ongoing benefactor. And so we're going to just test drive this idea that like, what if we also made stuff? And then hopefully the theory is we will provide sewn trades production for local brands and maybe some nationally based brands, and that'll be an income stream. But then we'll also be able to utilize that apparatus to bring in, to like create for local brands as well. So it's essentially like if Tom's shoes were also attached to an art museum instead of whatever it is Tom's shoes does, right? It's that kind of like social good production. And then rather than, dumping it into a different community across the world, we just like dump it right back into the arts organization. And hopefully, theoretically, if INTERFORM builds the kind of cultural capital it's supposed to be building anyway, the value of the products that come out of that structure should be higher, demand a higher price point, and make the whole thing more viable financially. I think. It is, I've done the math. It seems like it works, but like, let's see. So the next 3 years is really going to be about building and testing that hypothesis, because the long-term life of this organization is going to be built when we figure out how it pays for itself without you paying for it, right?
Yes.
And a lot of people do that through tickets. And I just feel like tickets is probably not going to work for us forever.
I think that's a really cool premonition into, how the sustainability is going to work long term, especially in this fluid world of like what we think should be free and what should have cost, and what we want to attend from our couch versus what we want to attend in person. But I think too, maybe the secondary and also important, like very important gain when you are generating your own income as an organization is that you don't have to answer to people who are not the community members, right? Or who are not representative of the same community that's benefiting from the services. So I think that that's so wise and so exciting.
I mean, you know what? There's a huge likelihood that it doesn't work. I mean, that is the, and that's I will always give credit to Walton Family Foundation for letting us test drive the idea, because like it not most non like most foundations would be like, what? No, that's not a thing. We haven't ever seen that. We don't have a model for that. We don't believe that that's possible. And we are getting away is not the right word, but like there's a little bit of trust to let us try, because the ramifications of if it does work are so great. It's a model you can sort of like export to lots of different things. And if it doesn't work, then like, well, it's really on us, right? Like so we all have to find jobs, but like, I won't let it get there. But it's it is and I do think that there's something about there's zero chance of me having been able to build this in any other environment, because in New York it would be too expensive to even do the art part, let alone the manufacturing part.
Right.
In New Orleans it just would be different. It wouldn't, it's New Orleans is expensive too. It's getting expensive here, but it's there is a level of possibility here that does not exist in other landscapes right now. And so I'm really trying to use that moment to like light the fire and let it go. I hope.
Yes, I'm so glad that you speak to that. I do think it is a powerful time to be in Northwest Arkansas, that is ripe with these opportunities to experiment more. And I love how you were kind of, in your describing, it was like, oh, like, if it doesn't work, we'll get new jobs, or, but it won't come to that. But, like going to the worst case scenario and realizing it's not that bad. Like we still have the same skills. We've learned more about what not to do, and we bring that to whatever is next.
Yeah, and we've got like we got good line items on our resume. We've got some skills, like we have had some stability. I mean, it is, and that is another thing that I think this whole idea of building an institution that's flexible, or building an institution that's nimble, there's a point in time where an institution becomes like a building itself, right? It becomes like a giant investment structure in and of itself. And we're going up against that very carefully, because there's something about the freedom to just evaporate at any moment that allows the stakes to be different. Like, obviously we would all be bummed out incredibly if INTERFORM stopped existing, but at the same time, it's the fact that it isn't concrete yet that allows us to push a little farther here and there. And so I, as a leader and as the person who's writing down all this stuff, I'm trying very hard to think through that next 10 years of like, what happens if it does become an institution that is a building, that is a structure, and like, what happens if it has to lose the nimbleness to maintain itself? And is that a worthwhile change to make? Do you know what I mean? Like, does that fundamentally change the DNA of it so much that it's not itself anymore? And like, oh, who knows?
Oh, there's so much philosophical time that you have to be grappling with these big notions of organization as person, as evolving, as all the things. So I think that that's another valuable segue to UK. So there is this inner tension of like what INTERFORM is and what it might necessarily need to become. But if it does get to achieve this self-sustaining, design-led fashion and art industry in Northwest Arkansas, why would that be worth it? What does that mean for this region in your brain?
I mean, I think what it does is it creates this, frankly, relatively new cultural model. I have seen this model work for some sewn trades apparel manufacturers, where like their brand is very valuable, and then they also teach classes on how to make things like that. I've seen that kind of work on a micro scale. But basically it means that there is an organism in this region, that an institution that isn't directly connected only to one source of funding, in a way that like, if the landscape changes, it may be able to stay, and like, because right now I think we're naive if we say, like, if the Walton Family Foundation pulled funding from Northwest Arkansas, 60%, 70% of the arts organizations would crumble. And like, there's nothing wrong with that. That's always been true. Like, it's, you know, it's like the Met didn't get to be the Met because it made its own money, right? It's like, that's just, it's a false, it's a, you know, it is a like a red herring argument, or if you to say that like all arts organizations must be self-sustaining. Like, no, there's always been a patron class that's always supported all, I mean, the Medicis, for goodness sakes, there's always a patron. But like, in the event that there isn't a patron, is it possible that industry itself, that production itself can create? And it's funny because I think that I look at it as like, think about like Andy Warhol's trajectory is an interesting one to look at, because he literally built a factory that was making his own art, right? And he was selling that, and that's what paid for that to happen. But it was built around one artist. Can you, I mean, it wasn't, he had a lot of artists working with him. It's actually it's a gross simplification to say it was about one artist, but like, can you extrapolate that a little bit more and make it a little bit more commercial and then spread it out over more people? And like, is that something that can be? And I think that like Meow Wolf is a great model of like this sort of democratization and almost Disneyfication of art, but like not in a bad way. Like, I feel like you can't, it's not negative. It's super wonderful to experience, and hundreds of artists benefit from that structure. So like, you know, what if Meow Wolf also was making their own merch, essentially, right? Like, what if all of that was being produced in-house? Like, how many human beings would benefit from that? And so it's just a kind of different way of thinking about production and a different way of thinking about consumption. And like, you know, it also has this idea of prioritizing making things here, because I think that we've offshored so much. That's a very broad, I mentioned Meow Wolf and Andy Warhol, so I also have, obviously have like very big ambitions for how important we're supposed to be, but like, there's this idea,
as you should, right? If we can't be like these other institutions you've mentioned that have a low bar of, you have
I gotta set it all the way up here. But I mean, the goal is like, what if we did make something that no one's ever seen? That would be fine.
Amazing. Yes.
Mad about it. You know, in worst case scenario, we provide some opportunities for people in Springdale that aren't protein-based jobs.
That would be awesome.
And that's not a terrible worst case scenario. So
no. So I love too that you are making references to this outside world of arts and fashion. And I wonder what inspiration from outside looks like for you these days. Like, how do you keep learning, keep understanding, you know, like whatever trends matter to you, maybe they don't matter at all. Like, just what is that continual learner hat like for you?
yeah, I mean, I think that now I really do look at models that are financially viable. I think financially viable is like really the kind of big sister that I'm looking at these days, where I think that the creativity part used to really drive me. Like, I used to really feel like, oh my gosh, how will we ever be as creative as XYZ? And I think that as I get older, I realize that like creativity is a force of nature. It exists everywhere. It is primal. It is not stoppable. Like, all you have to do is throw some money on it, and really it just kicks right up. And then but I also learned that like a lot of the things that we've lionized in our world, and specifically in arts, got there because of their connection to money anyway, right? Like, a lot of what we deem as like good art was decided because of somebody else's gallerist, right? And like, that's just not particularly, I don't think of that as like a particularly miraculous happening, right? And so I feel like, you know, I look at structures that can spread value farther, but like self-sustain in a, you know. And so I spend a lot of time looking at financial modeling, which is like a really boring, and if you told 17-year-old Robin, who was like throwing art parties because she lived next to the bar, that like, you know, 37-year-old Robin would be like, well, really, it's about the financial viability of future structures. But like, you know,
It
So
matters. Is
it
there,
matters.
a big sister kind of financial model, like someone who's doing it well that you are admiring right now, or a source that you're liking to learn from that you would recommend?
So there's two models I really like. I love the Meow Wolf model. I hated on Meow Wolf for a long time until I finally went to one, and then I'm like, oh, okay, it is. I
And
get
let's
it.
break that down. What is Meow?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So Meow Wolf is this like really miraculous artist collective based project that built in was the Santa Fe is where the first one was. And it's like they took an old bowling alley, and it was, I don't even know how many artists were involved in the first one, but it's like 15 to 20 artists like did this massive experiential installation that is just hugely successful because it is so unlike any other kind of arts experience. And they managed to, through tickets and investor, like they got like George R.R. Martin invested a lot of capital into the first one, but like through ticketing the experience itself, and then also building a brand that has value, they've been able to sort of like franchise it to different cities. And then weirdly in the last year or so, the founding CEO has stepped down, and now they have Disney executives that are coming into place there. And so it's a very interesting thing to watch, because it's like, is it going to fall apart? Maybe. Is it going to get so corporate that it kills itself? Possibly. Or is it going to just go ahead and like totally subvert expectation time and time again, and continue to work with local artists and create these experiences that are like otherworldly? We took our kids to the Meow Wolf in Denver. We took our 2-year-old and my 90-year-old grandmother to the Meow Wolf in Denver, and it was amazing. And like, if that just speaks to the breadth of the experience there, like all 6 of us or 5 of us or however many were just like jaw on the floor the whole time. And that's an age range from 2 to 90. So that's like a pretty good, but it's Disney World. I mean, it really is like, it's just sensory overload. And then there's an organization in Alabama called Alabama Channon, and it's a manufacturing model where it's made in the USA apparel that has juiced its value up. So it's like $400 a shirt, but the reason it's that is because it's made here sustainably. And there are educational workshops associated with it, and there's a kind of like foundation associated with it, but it's a for-profit brand. And so so I look at both brands, like apparel brands that have managed to do something interesting with their structure and like where they're being produced, and also arts organizations that are kind of like allowing the experience to be broader and bringing more people in. I have my critiques of both things. Like, I think that Meow Wolf it'd be cool if you also knew the artists' names. Like, I think it's really kind of problematic that the only thing you know is Meow Wolf. But I think that people are probably getting the recognition on the outside of it. We just don't know necessarily what it is. But, and then Alabama Channon, like, you can only get so far in your life with like indigo dyed linen. Like, it's just like a specific brand. So yeah, I think I'm still trying to learn and seeking to find other kinds of organizations that are and poach elements of them. I also love the biennial model still. Like there's a biennial in Europe that I adore called Manifesta, and it's always in a different place. And it is every 2 years, it's in a different city in Europe, and it very much becomes about that place, but it's about the sort of like international, because it's an international biennial, the kind of international interpretation of that place. So like in 2012, I went to Manifesta in Ghent in Belgium, and it was in an old coal factory, and it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And it was all, the art was very, very much about production, about manufacturing, about that kind of like industrial work. And it was just astounding. It was just beautiful. And so like those kinds of things, right? Like being very much about where it is and what it is, and trying to sort of like democratize it a little bit, and then spread out who gets paid by it is the kind of goal.
So cool. I think that having those things at the forefront of your mind makes it even more energizing to like, this is part of that. INTERFORM is part of that. I get to be part of this world of amazing things that are happening, that are bringing in people. And so I get why that would continue to motivate and inspire. I wanted to ask you if there are, any pieces of wisdom that you've learned or lessons to share for people who are trying to operate at, that forefront of creative
Mm.
growth and change in their own communities.
I mean, I really do think it kind of goes back to that, like, the rules are necessary. I believe in rules. I do. But I think that to the people who are telling you you have to do it this way, or like if you don't do it XYZ way, or like that are telling you all of the ways in which you can't do something instead of emphasizing what are the ways you can do something, like just don't listen to them as hard. Listen for the voices that are solving for yes, right? So listen to the voices that are saying like, well, we could do this, or you could do that, or like, that are turning that Rubik's cube, because the world is full of people who tell you can't. Like, it's just, that's all it is. And so those miraculous moments where you hear somebody say, maybe if, what if, we could, maybe we should, those kinds of people who are thinking through further and deeper into what's possible, gravitate there. Like, turn that way, because that's the support you need if you want to grow. And then also be that person, right? Like, and if you're somebody who's in the creative community, and like, be that person for your creative community. So, and yeah, it takes more time. It's harder work, but like, it's worth it. So do less of it. If it's too much, do less, but do work with fewer people, but work deeper for those people, I guess would be.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that. It reminds me of like when you're doing improv, right? Like you're supposed to be the yes and person, and other people
Exactly.
are the yes and person. Like be the good improv partner in the world. And also, I don't know, I think it does take an element of self-awareness, because it's not always easy to show up as the yes and person for other people. So maybe like recognizing when we're the no but person, and snapping ourselves out of that by going to Beowulf, by going to whatever brings us back to our creative, full energy self is good. So I think that's really wise, what you shared. And as we're wrapping up, Robin, this has been so special and I'm so grateful. What do you want people to leave knowing about you and your work? And secondly, like, what are you really looking forward to either today or this year or in your life or whatever, however you want to take that, really?
So, I think if there was one thing I wanted people to know about INTERFORM, is that it is like, I certainly am its loudest cheerleader, but I'm definitely not the only person in it. And that, we've built a team that is now becoming like mutually self-sustaining. So like, I think someday I get to remove myself and it still has that same kind of like spark in it. And I think that's because the people who have entered into it are so fabulous. And so I hope that people who look at INTERFORM know that if you can feel however you want about this one here, but there's like 10 other people or 12 other people who are like just as valid, or like totally brilliant and like putting the work in. So, don't ever write an organization off because of one individual, for sure. But also know that these things are fluid, and that we are a structure that if you find the thing you don't like about it, I guarantee you, if you come tell us about it, we're going to be like, well, okay, what then? Like, yes, and with us, like, how do we fix it? And so there's that. Like, we're not settled, we're not settled on what it is yet. And then I'm really looking forward to, man, right now the ride is just so, like, getting to like sit down and talk about what we do is just so energizing, because I realize that it's just so something, it's magical little moment. And like, things in Springdale are very exciting right now, and things in our office specifically are very exciting. And I think in the next couple months, you're going to see, like, I think Fashion Week is going to be one of the sort of performative pinnacles of my career. I think that it's really going to sort of like set some bars high. But I also think that, like, I think within 3 years, we will have built a financial model where I get to be choosier about who we work with, and like choosier about where money comes from. And I like that idea. Like, I like the idea of being financially viable to the point that we get to say no, and that we get to drive the conversation. Because I think that in the arts, if you're not lucky and have a benefactor that believes in you, you have to tap dance for a lot of people whose voices might not care about what it is you're supposed to be doing. And so I just truly hope we get to be an organization that gets to set our own rules as we go.
Yes, it's all so beautiful to think about. I love the chance to see into your mind, and I admire and I hope for the future that you're planning, because I think it's a place that we would all benefit from being. So, Robin, thank you so much for taking the
Thank
time. And,
you.
I can't wait to share this story. I hope people go to INTERFORM's website, their social medias, their fashion shows, everything that's coming up, because it's going to be great.
Thank you so much. What a lovely interview.
Oh, so much.